Hey, Cindy, how are you today?
Hey Tara, I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Good, good. I was working on my book, making some nice progress there. How's your writing going?
It's going pretty well. As a matter of fact, I've had a whole lot on the same subject this week, and I thought maybe that was one of the things that we could talk about.
What are you hearing? What things are coming up for you?
I have had probably more questions about all of the things in the news about not taking Advil or Motrin or Aleve, the non-steroidal anti-inflammatories.
Me
Because
too.
I have clients who've taken them for years, taken them for a variety of different things, and I'm getting just kind of randomly this email here, this text there. It's like, hey, if I start to feel sick, you mean I can't take these anymore? So
Right.
I imagined you were hearing the same thing and thought maybe that would be just good for us to go over today.
I think that's a great idea because you're right. I did get a few calls about that from my clients as well, where really it's an unusual thing. We're used to taking these kinds of things in any time we get sick and we're feeling pain, and now all of a sudden you have authorities declaring that we should not be taking this. So I think you're right. It's a great idea to just sort of help to talk about why they're making these recommendations not to take these NSAIDs, and then what people, maybe we can get into what people can do, because I know you and I definitely always go for the more natural alternatives, and so maybe we can help people
And
with
prevention.
that. That's the best way of all. Absolutely.
That's the best way, absolutely.
Good. So
So I
what are
think,
you?
yeah, just to kind of take a step back, I think we need to recognize that for things like fever, these NSAIDs, these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, actually are just kind of covering a symptom. And when it comes to even the flu, when it comes to colds, anytime we have a fever, it's the body's signal that something is going on. And by taking these drugs, we can mask what's going on. We're certainly more comfortable if we don't have a fever. And we can go through our day a little bit better because that tends to be a priority with people. I think that may be changing as well. But you probably hear the same thing. Had a low-grade fever, took a couple of, these kind of ibuprofen, to use the generic term, or naproxen sodium to use the generic term.
Yeah.
Um, and I felt much better.
Right, right. And it's funny, I do remember even, on the flip side of that, when I first started working, for example, when I finished school and, grad school, and I would feel a little bit off, and I would feel like I needed to push myself. I wasn't sick enough where I was going to have to spend the day in bed, but I was just not right. And I would do whatever I needed to do to push through. And what I came to realize was that was like the exact wrong thing to do, because the reason I was feeling a little bit off was because my body was trying to fight something off. And by ignoring that, I ended up kind of reducing my body's efforts and feeling worse and having a more prolonged illness. And so, yeah, I definitely shifted my thinking on that. And then to talk specifically about the fever reducers and things like that, I remember my naturopath telling me when my son was an infant, hey, a fever is actually good. When
Mhm.
you have, he's like, if you have a sick child and, they get those really high fevers, he's like, that's what you want. That's the sign of a healthy immune system response. If you have a kid who's got a runny nose chronically, but doesn't get a high fever, that kid is not having a healthy immune response. They're not like sending out the army to fight off this infection. And
Mhm.
he mentioned that to me about my son, and let the fever do its work. It was a huge shift in my thinking. And really, I from that point never really would give him any fever reducers or anything like that, because I wanted him to work through that. He'd be more tired and need to rest more if I didn't give him those things, and he'd get through it much faster. So it really was allowing the body to do what it could do. So I totally get where this recommendation comes from, because we are taking away the body's first defense when we take
Absolutely.
something that takes away the fever.
And then just to build on what you had said, the other end of that spectrum, in working for the hospital, working in the hospital for years, we would see an older population whose immune system can't produce that same response. Their immune system was tired, so to speak. So you would see people with chronic infections when they were in their 80s that they couldn't produce the fever to fight that infection. Without a fever, we sometimes had a very difficult time recognizing that there was even something going on, because it's one of the signs and symptoms, of course, that we look for with illness.
Right,
And you're
right.
right, parents get very frightened when these high fevers come about. And in small children, it's that new immune system ready to kick in. As we get older, our bodies don't have that same large response. So we do need to pay more of attention to a fever that's maybe just 100, where in a child, it may be 103 for for their type of response.
Right, right. And that's interesting too, because if you think about it, the thing that scares us when we see a child with a high fever is it's like, whoa, that's such a high temperature relative to what I usually get as an adult, right? Not to say you can't get a high temperature as an adult, but you don't have as many high fevers as little kids do. But it is important, like you said, to think about it as a good sign showing that the immune system really is kicking in and really, working to fight that infection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's as we look at the recommendations and as we look at some of the people who've been the sickest with this COVID-19 virus, it is the older population. It's a population that is at risk because their immune system can't produce that response. And then as it does, the first inclination of caregivers is perhaps to stifle that or to tamp down that immune response with that fever, because it's uncomfortable to have a fever. And frankly, for people who feel helpless watching someone else be ill, it's something we can do. So of course
True.
you want to do it. And that's where the recommendations, I think, in general, to avoid those things for fever is probably one of the better trends or one of the better uh, practices that will come out of all of this, is that a fever is the body doing its work.
Mm-hmm.
And we
I
need to let the body do its work.
I agree with you because I think we really have lost that. Like I said, when my naturopath said that to me, my son is 16 now. So 16 years ago, he told me that, and I just sort of had never heard anything like that. It was always suppress a fever and whatever. I mean, I guess on the one side, because a fever can dehydrate you, right? That is a concern.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason why they're saying to suppress a fever. But if you are conscientious about staying hydrated, and then let your body do its work, you really have the best of both worlds because it's your body's natural response. Your body's designed to survive, right? So it's going
Mm-hmm.
to have something in place to fight off invaders. And that fever is a big one when those invaders start getting in, like this coronavirus seems to be able to do, right? It seems to be able to just get in quite readily. Yeah. So I think if we were talking about the benefit of a higher temperature, right, what a fever
Mm-hmm.
does for us, I've also been seeing things, and I have practices myself that I do to raise my body temperature to make it less hospitable to any germ that might get in, including the coronavirus, right? Do you have any things that you like to do that in that vein?
Absolutely. I'm crazy about my sauna. I'm an avid sauna user and have been for years. And it's just, the artificial fever aspect of a sauna is just kind of one aspect that people may not be as aware of. People can appreciate the fact that if you can perspire, you can rid your body of toxins. It's a mechanism of bringing blood closer to the surface of your body. Sauna use, infrared sauna use in particular, has had studies shown that its benefits are very much equivalent to exercise from a cardiovascular standpoint.
Hmm.
It has a positive impact on lowering fasting glucose levels. Excuse me. But one of the biggest benefits it has is something called heat shock proteins. And it causes your body to release and create more of these heat shock proteins. And that's one of, there are many different kinds of proteins that
Mm-hmm.
are these heat shock proteins. But the best way that I've seen them described is chaperone proteins. And so these are proteins in the body that make sure other parts of the body are all in order and doing their work.
Oh, that's a very interesting name. It's a good name because I see what you're talking about. So these things would be released to make sure that everybody else is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So overall, it's ensuring that the system is functioning in the way it's supposed to, basically.
Right. And at the time these heat shock proteins were discovered, it was thought they were only released in the presence of elevated body temperatures. But they also now realize that cold, and if you've had any experience with or been reading anything about cold therapy lately, these heat shock proteins are released on either end of the
Oh,
temperature
yeah,
extremes.
I
Um,
see.
and the good news is that you don't have to get your body to virus killing temperatures in order to have these proteins released and have them do the work kind of on your behalf.
Okay, so and yeah, so so when you mentioned virus killing, the temperature for virus killing, I mean that's pretty high, isn't it? Like what is it, like 145 or something pretty substantial, I think. I don't remember the number offhand, but it's much higher than we'd ever really heat our bodies to. You're
Right.
saying, right? You're saying these things can come about even before we get to that kind of temperature, right?
Right. The heat shock protein system is triggered before we get to those extremely high temperatures. So it's not a sterilization process inside of the body. It's a triggered mechanism that the body recognizes and moves forward with, similar to what happens in the presence of fevers.
Fever. Okay. So I think it's interesting, and I know you said your practice is sauna, which I am so envious of that you have that. I don't have that, but I do have something. Maybe other people may have access to these sorts of things. The thing that I use regularly is a biomat. So it's like a heating pad, but it's not designed like a heating pad in the traditional sense. It uses all these different um, quartz kind of thing so that it really it's beneficial, not detrimental like a typical heating pad is. But that also, if you do, I do like 20 minutes on it a day to raise my temperature. It's funny, I'll know, I'm in the Northeast here, and so it's very early spring. We're still having cool temperatures. So if I
Mhm.
go to bed to lay down on this, and if my feet feel a little bit cool, I'll be on there for at the maximum temperature for like 20 minutes, which is the most they recommend. But by the end of that 20 minutes, my feet will feel warm. So I know it is really elevating
Core
my
body.
whole core, right? And then I guess
Mhm.
maybe those shock proteins are being activated and and whatever. But maybe people don't have access to a biomat either, right?
Mhm.
But there are other things that you can do, right?
Warm baths have been, kind of a go-to for health for ages.
Right.
Epsom salts, hot, a good hot soak, as long as you don't have any other medical conditions that would contradict that.
Right,
Um,
exactly. You'd know whether you should or should not be in a
right,
bath, right? Yeah.
right. But certainly anything that raises that core body temperature significantly, that really causes the sweat. The same is true with exercise. And um, you certainly wouldn't want to, if you have a fever coming on, exercise, but from a preventative standpoint, the high intensity raising the core body core temperature acts in a similar way.
Right, right. So I think those are some really good practical things that people can do, even if they aren't lucky enough to have a sauna. or if they don't have a biomat, which I just happen to be lucky enough to have as well, um, a hot soak is good. And I love the idea of the Epsom salt in there as well, because that's just good for the muscles, and especially when we're so stressed and
Magnesium,
tense.
yep, magnesium uptake.
Yeah, yeah. And then just plain old exercise, right? If you get to the point of breaking a sweat, which is obviously what's happening to any of those other things that we just described, that's when you know that your temperature has become elevated, and then that's what you're trying to do. So wow, so hopefully these are some ideas for people to um, move one step forward in prevention, because we're probably all going to come face to face or nose to nose, however you want to talk about it. We're going
With
to encounter
something, yep,
this.
there's always going to be something come along, whatever the next thing is. So
Right. Yeah.
it's being as healthy as you can be, having these practices in place so you're much less susceptible to whatever comes along.
That's
So we've
exactly
talked about this, extensively, and I think that's part of the reason why you said, why don't we start recording these? Because every week we have these conversations based on what we're hearing from our clients.
how. Right.
And hopefully it'll help a wider group of folks. So
Absolutely.
thanks for
Yeah.
bringing it up.
Yeah, yeah, right. Prevention is both of us are always about prevention, and here's the top way: get your immune system to be functioning in the healthiest way that it possibly can, so that when you do encounter anything, and there are so many things in the world, you are in the best position to just fight it off. So yeah, well, thank you for having the chance to talk about this today. And like I said, I hope it will help some people. All right, well, I think I better get back to writing. How about you, Cindy?
Okay,
All
same
right,
here. We'll talk
see
again.
you next week.